Most teachers collect information about their students in the first week. Very few of them use it. Today, I want to talk about why that happens and what to do differently. Welcome to the Secondary Teacher Podcast, the podcast for middle and high school teachers juggling multiple preps to get the strategies to reduce overwhelm so that you don't have to choose between being an effective teacher and prioritizing important relationships. I'm your host, Khristen Massic, a 10-year high school engineering teacher, former middle school assistant principal, and teacher coach. Every week, we will discuss strategies, systems, and time-saving tips to help you not only survive but thrive as a multiple prep teacher. Last episode, we talked about think, write, pair, share, and why giving students a structure for conversation changes who gets to participate in it. Today, we're staying in the first week, but shifting from how students talk to each other to how you learn about them as learners. Because there's a difference between knowing your students and knowing how your students learn. And only one of those helps you make better teaching decisions. For years, I gave my students some version of an interest survey at the beginning of the year. I even made mine digital, which felt very organized and intentional at the time. Students filled it out. I collected it. I had every intention of using it. And then I never looked at it again. Not because I didn't care, because when I actually needed it, when I was trying to form groups or figure out who needed more support, I didn't have time to go back and open a digital form and scroll through responses and cross-reference names. And I'd find out later, sometimes much later, that two students had a conflict I could have anticipated, or that a student who seemed disengaged had actually told me that in the survey they do better once they know what to expect, or that the student who kept asking for another example had checked "see an example first" as their number one learning preference. The information was there. That's not a motivation problem, that's a design problem. Here's what I've come to believe about first week data collection. The format of the information matters just as much as the information itself. If collecting student data requires you to open a file, search for a name, and read through paragraph responses, you're probably not going to do it at 7:45 a.m. when you're trying to figure out how to group students before first period. But if you can pick up a one-page reflection, scan it in 30 seconds, and immediately see that half your class circled depends on the group, under group work, and several students checked "see an example first," now you have something you can actually use, and that changes everything about how the information serves you. Here's the shift I made in what I was trying to learn. I stopped asking students what they liked and started asking how they learned, because those are very different questions. Knowing a student likes basketball doesn't help me form groups, but knowing a student circled wait and watch first under "in class I usually" tells me something I can actually act on. Knowing a student's favorite movie doesn't help me plan support, but knowing that when they get stuck, it helps if they can break it into smaller steps, that tells me how to structure a hard task for that student. The resource I use for this is called The Way I Learn. And the reason I designed it the way I did is specifically because of this problem, the gap between collecting information and actually using it. Students check all the learning preferences that fit them. They pick two supports that help when they get stuck. They circle how they usually show up in class. They reflect on group work, and they answer two short written prompts, including "one thing I want my teacher to know about me as a learner." The whole page is designed to be scannable. Checkboxes, circles, short responses, because patterns jump off the page when you're not just sorting through paragraphs. And that means when you're forming groups at 7:45, you can actually use it. Here's where I think most first week surveys quietly fail. Teachers collect the information and then wait for the right moment to use it. But the right moment is usually right now. When you're forming groups, pull it out. Look for who circled "not my favorite" under group work and think about who they do best beside. Look for who checked "work with the partner" and pair them intentionally. When you're planning a complex task, look for who needs step-by-step instructions and make sure those are visible before students start. When a student seems stuck or disengaged, look back at what they say when what they said helps when they get stuck. Sometimes the answer is already there. The survey isn't a one-time activity, it's a reference document. And the more you treat it like one, the more value it gives you all year. One of my favorite things about this resource is that it's designed to be revisited. Halfway through the semester, have students complete it again, not to catch them in a contradiction, but because students change as learners over the course of a year. The student who circled "not my favorite" under group work in September might circle "usually okay" by January because the structure of your classroom has made it feel safer. The student who checked "I need more time" might stop checking it by March because they've built confidence in the content. That comparison is genuinely interesting information, and it shows students something important too, that you're still paying attention, not just during the first week, all year. I want to name something before we close. Classroom culture isn't just about making students feel welcome, it's about helping them feel understood. Those are different things. Students notice when directions become clearer after the first week, when groups feel intentional, when support isn't random. They don't always know why it feels different, but they feel it. And that feeling, "my teacher is paying attention, my teacher actually knows how I learn," is one of the fastest ways to build trust in those first few weeks of school. That trust is what classroom culture is actually made of. Not icebreakers, not syllabi, responsiveness. Next episode, we're talking about the syllabus, but not how to get through it faster. I want to ask a very different question entirely. What if your syllabus could actually build classroom culture instead of feeling like a list of rules students tune out before you finish reading it? That one's coming up next. If you'd like to use The Way I Learn with your own students, I have linked it in the show notes. It's designed to help you understand your students as learners, not just as people, so you can make more intentional planning and grouping decisions throughout the year. The guide includes implementation options, modifications for multilingual learners and hesitant writers, as well as ideas for revisiting the reflection later in the semester. And if you're looking for a complete set of classroom systems for the first weeks of school, it's included inside the Secondary Teacher Systems Toolkit, along with 8 other ready-to-use resources. Both links are in the show notes. Before you go, one question. Do your students leave the first week knowing that you know them, or knowing that you understand how they learn? Because one builds familiarity, the other one builds trust. Finish something that makes tomorrow lighter. I'll see you next time.